Lifetime has America looked for answers in a way that said they're probably not in Washington, but we can find them. We still have faith as people that they're to be found, and they can be found in other settings. May not be involved in increased regulation. There's a need for regulation. It needs to be predictable. It needs to be understandable. It needs to be knowable. It doesn't need to be something uncertain. And let me just add one little caveat before I close, and you can tell, you know, I used to be in the Senate, so I tend to go on and on and on. Having had the privilege of observing government for quite some time, I've found that when people lose their capacity in the legislative branch to achieve what they had hoped they would be achieving, it is easy for administrations to retreat into the executive branch and to seek to do by regulation that which they could no longer do by legislation. Now, this is something which I think we have already seen, but I predict you would be seeing, and you should be attentive to, in Washington, D.C. The change in the United States Congress has, in the House of Representatives, which is the people's house, most directly reflective of the people of America, has signaled enough. Whoa, slow down. We want some of our country back. We want some of our freedom back. We don't want you to go so fast that we don't have the capacity to do things in ways which we feel are important, that are related to our freedom. Not everyone believes what I believe about that signal. And you certainly, many of you may not. But I believe that's what the voice was saying today. Some believe that, well, we just didn't say things clearly enough. And we didn't quite explain how superior government would be when it finally takes everything over. And so we're going to continue to try and advance our agenda. Now, if the agenda, which was, I believe, rejected in large measure by the American people, is, instead of being abandoned, is relocated from the Congress of the United States, or the legislative branch, to the executive branch, into the bureaucracy, and the implementation of the agenda moves from a legislative implementation to a regulatory implementation, the incidence of imposition is going to be significantly greater at an earlier time. And secondly, believe it or not, the Congress of the United States has a mitigating or moderating effect on things. In order to get 535 people to agree on something, that has to tumble through the stream of legislation in ways that knock some of the rough edges off. These folks who served in the legislature know how that works. But you put it straight into an ideologue or a academic and a bureaucracy, and the sharp edges of purism are there. And let me say that what the American people face in a significant measure right now is the potential that things which, even if onerous, passed by Congress, are without the moderating effects of a Congress, are implemented by a bureaucracy, that the impacts could be even amplified, exponentially greater, and have a more significant effect. If those impacts are greater, with more significant effect, and they are adverse to the entrepreneurial energy of American culture, it would be a serious mistake indeed. So at the federal level in particular, I have alerted those individuals with whom I work to be especially attentive to what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in the bureaucracy. And not to say, well, the Congress has changed, the threat is gone. That would be one of those instances when one, thinking he had dodged a bullet, was looking a cannonball in the eye. Because the bullet of the congressional legislation would have been a far smaller caliber than the massive energy coming without the moderation of the tumbling that comes in the legislative process. Ultimately, the governance of the United States and the governance of our states relates to the freedom of people. The idea that people need governance at all, I think, springs in some measure from the fact that we don't want to govern ourselves as much as we want to defend ourselves. And the first purpose of government is to defend from those outside who would come to hurt us. But then we realize that there are sometimes influences and forces within our communities that need to be adjusted and need to be defended against. So we not only defend ourselves, but we defend against ourselves. But it's about freedom. We want to limit the defense against ourselves in a way that provides a basis for our continuing freedom, for the enterprise, the energy, the innovation of freedom to go forward. And it's with that in mind that freedom should be at the core of our understanding. I think we should always ask ourselves, will we be freer after a decision or after a policy, or would we be freer before the policy? And a law that somehow impairs our freedom overall is not a law that recommends itself very highly. I happen to think a lot of the things that we think of as curtailing our freedom really were necessary for us. I mean, people think that we aren't free as it relates to airplanes because we now have to go through the free massage you get at the airport, and I've gone through the line twice in some cases. But I personally believe that I'm freer to travel because they do that than I would be if they didn't have the security at the airport. But I do think we have to ask ourselves, what's the freedom consequence? On the base of the Statue of Liberty is the poetry that most of us memorized, I think, in the 5th grade. Give me your tired, your poor.